When I was about 13, I had a pretty normal life with both my parents. Our 2-story greenhouse was on a quiet suburban street in a peaceful town in Pennsylvania. The neighbors on our block were friendly and social. If we saw anyone outside, we'd greet each other. A neighbor I often saw was Lee, who lived in the house next door. Lee lived with his wife, Janet, and they spent a lot of their time gardening. It was always expected to see one of them working on their front lawn. Their yellow house, styled like something from the 1950s with a carport driveway, was always busy with their activities. My dad, who grew up a few houses away from them, told me their house hadn't changed much over the years. My best friend, Ryan, lived across the street with his mom, grandfather, and brother, Jake. Ryan and I went to the same school, and we'd often get a ride from Jake, who already had his license. We shared a few classes and would always meet up at lunch. On weekends, we'd hang out, usually playing video games or heading to the library. It sounds lame, but it was within walking distance, and we often picked up comic books or books for school projects. It was a good day when Jake would be around to take us to the movies or the mall. If we weren't hanging out, we would text each other, talking about everything from what was going on to the random things we found funny or dreading school the next day. Both of my parents worked. My dad was a police officer, and my mom worked night shifts as a nurse at the hospital. So, I'd spend a lot of time talking to Ryan through my headset or texting him if he couldn't come over. One evening, I was home alone. My dad had already left for work, and my mom was working her shift, so I had the house to myself. I was playing video games in the living room, chatting with Ryan on the headset. Then, a loud knock at the door made my heart race. I put down the controller and went to the window next to the door. I peeked through the blinds and saw a police officer standing on the stoop. I cracked the door open and greeted him. "Good evening. Do you know if your neighbor in number 6 is home?" He was referring to Lorraine, a kind old lady who lived a few houses down. I shook my head, and the officer thanked me before leaving. I went back to my game. The next few days were uneventful. Just school, homework, and video games. That Thursday, things started to feel off. I woke up early and went to wait for Ryan and Jake to pick me up, but they never showed. The garage door stayed shut, and after waiting a while, I figured maybe Ryan had slept in or wasn't feeling well. So I walked to the end of the street to catch the bus. Ryan usually texted if he wasn't coming, but there was no message. I still made it to school on time, but by lunchtime, I hadn't heard from him all day. That was unusual. He always texted me, even if it was just to say he wasn't in the mood to talk. After school, I sent him a message, asking if he was okay. When I didn't hear back, I went home and grabbed the homework he had missed to drop it off at his place. I knocked on his door, waited a few minutes, then rang the doorbell. When there was still no answer, I checked my phone. There were no texts from Ryan, just a few from my mom. I slid the folder with his schoolwork into his mailbox and headed back home. That evening, my mom was off, so we ate dinner together. I checked my phone before bed, expecting at least a short reply from Ryan, but there was nothing. The next day, still no word from him. I was starting to feel concerned, but I didn't want to overthink it. I decided to wait it out. When I got home that afternoon, I saw my mom leave for work. After she left, I crossed the street again to drop off the missed work, but something about it felt strange. The mailbox still had the schoolwork I had left the day before. I hesitated but didn't knock. I didn't want to be a nuisance. Later that evening, I got caught up in a video game, losing track of time. When I finally checked my phone, it was about 10 p.m. There was a text from Ryan from around 8:47. "Hi" was all it said. I felt a mix of frustration and anxiety. Something was off. Maybe he was in trouble. I replied, "How are you?" He texted back, "Good. Why weren't you at school?" I asked, "Sick. Did you get the homework?" "Yeah." Are you feeling better? No. The conversation was short and strange. Ryan wasn't one for long replies, but his one-word answers felt wrong. Will you be back on Monday? I asked. No, came the reply. The conversation ended as quickly as it had started, leaving me with more questions than answers. I wasn't feeling tired anymore, so I decided to play my game for a little while longer. By 1 a.m., I finally gave up and called it quits. I was exhausted and ready for bed. Before climbing in, I noticed a light on across the street at Ryan's house. Curiosity got the best of me, so I tiptoed over to the window and peeked out. It was the upstairs bedroom, which would have been Jake's room. The blinds were drawn, but I could make out the figure of someone pacing back and forth. I stayed there, watching for about 7 minutes as the person continued to walk back and forth. I muttered to myself, "What the hell?" and crawled into bed. I woke up the next morning, completely forgetting about the night before, but it all came rushing back once I was fully awake. The day went by uneventfully. I spent the day either in front of the TV or on my laptop. My mom was off again that evening, so we hung out and watched movies. When it got late, my mom decided to turn in for the night, and I stayed up on the couch with my laptop. Around 1 a.m., I felt a vibration coming from the couch. I pulled my phone from under me. It was a text from Ryan. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" It read. Unsure what to think, I replied with, "WTF?" The lamp in the living room was on, so maybe he had noticed that. I got up from the couch and walked over to the window. I peeked through the blinds and saw a light on upstairs. This time, a silhouette of a person was visible, standing at the window, staring at my house and at me. It didn't move at all. I stood there for about 5 minutes, staring back. The person didn't do anything. I had had enough and went to my room, feeling incredibly creeped out. I peeked out of my bedroom window, and I kid you not, the person was still in the same spot. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to turn my phone off for the night. Just as I was about to power it down, another message popped up. "I can see you." A wave of paranoia hit me like a ton of bricks. I dropped my phone and jumped into bed, covering my head with the blankets like a child. I had the hardest time trying to fall asleep and didn't actually manage to sleep until early in the morning. Once the sun came up, I felt watched. I didn't touch my phone at all the next day, avoided it like the plague, and spent as much time with my parents as I could. Normally, I wouldn't mind when my parents worked the night shift, but tonight, I didn't want to be left alone. I spent most of the evening sitting in front of the TV. I wasn't in the mood for video games, so I just flipped through channels. As my eyes grew heavy, I laid my head down to rest. I ended up falling asleep on the couch, and when I woke up around 10 p.m., I decided it was time for bed. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when my phone rang. It was loud and made me jump. Groggy, I rubbed my eyes and answered the phone. "Hello," I mumbled. Silence. Before I could hang up, I heard breathing on the other end. "Hello," I asked again, and to my surprise, I heard my own voice echoing back. Whoever it was hung up. I assumed it was a wrong number until I noticed the caller ID. It was Ryan. My gut told me I had to call him back. Why would he be calling me at this hour? Determined to figure out what was going on, I dialed the number and waited for an answer. As I waited, something strange caught my ear. A faint ringtone, coming from somewhere in my house. I sat up, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. My stomach twisted when I realized it was coming from the guest room right next to mine. Just as I made that realization, someone finally answered the phone. A deep, raspy voice spoke on the other end. "You're not alone," before abruptly ending the call. All the blood drained from my face, and a wave of nausea hit me like a truck. I felt like I was going to be sick, but I didn't know what to do. My brain screamed at me to lock the door, but my body froze. I was in shock. Then I heard the creaking of floorboards. Something inside me snapped, and I bolted toward the door. I locked it quickly, then shoved a nearby drawer against it. I could hear a door opening and footsteps moving across the floor in the hallway. They stopped right at my bedroom door. I heard the doorknob rattle as whoever was on the other side tried to open it. When they realized it was locked, I heard them say, "Come out! Come out! Wherever you are." The words sent a chill through me, and then the person began pounding on the door. The thud was so hard it made me collapse to the floor. The intruder kept banging on the door, each strike louder and more violent than the last. I crawled backward, my back hitting the bed. I felt my phone, which I had dropped earlier, and with trembling hands, I dialed 911. The intruder's wailing filled the air as he slammed into the door. His words were incoherent, almost inhuman, and I had never heard anything like it before. Finally, an operator picked up, and I explained what was happening. She stayed on the line, trying to keep me calm, but by that point, I had wet myself and was hyperventilating. Waiting for the police felt like an eternity, and all I could think was that the psychopath could break in at any moment. I crawled into my closet, hoping to hide. The operator reassured me that the police were on their way, but all I could hear was the man's insane shrieking, which was growing louder by the second. I begged the operator to help me, but my vision was blurring, and I had to put my head between my knees to avoid passing out. Just as I expected the door to come crashing in, there was suddenly silence. I waited for what felt like hours, expecting him to burst in and start screaming again, but nothing happened. He was gone. The next thing I remember is blacking out. I could hear a police officer calling my name, and once I heard that, I finally felt safe. He explained that the other officers were searching the area thoroughly, and that my parents were on their way. I had never been so relieved to see them. They were terrified, and my mom wouldn't let go of me. We later found out that the man had managed to escape before the police arrived. They searched the entire street, but found no trace of him. The neighbor, Lorraine, was found dead the same night the police had asked if I'd heard from her. Her decomposed body was found in her house. The authorities discovered her headless body in the living room, covered in knives. After further investigation, they found her head in the attic. As for Ryan, his entire family had been brutally murdered. The person I had seen standing in the window was his grandfather's body. I was spared most of the gruesome details, and honestly, I think that's for the best. According to the police, the man had hidden out in Ryan's house after killing the elderly woman. He murdered Ryan's family while they were sleeping, then lived in their house for a few days. Both homes were trashed. Overturned furniture, broken TVs, and destroyed chairs. The only thing that had been taken was Ryan's phone. It wasn't long after that my family and I decided to move to another state. The killer was never caught, and the case remains open to this day. The police still have no idea who he was. The only way they could link the crimes was because of the brutal way he killed his victims and the destruction he left behind. He would sneak into their homes, commit his horrific acts, and slip away into the night without a trace. I spent years having nightmares, hearing his awful screams echo in my mind. After countless therapy sessions, self-defense classes, and eventually moving in with my fiancé, I thought my life was finally returning to normal. That is, until I got a call the other day. The number seemed familiar, but I ignored it, assuming it was just a spam call. Then it hit me. It was Ryan's phone number.